Welcome everybody to the 2024 Povey Lecture. As you may know, this series of lectures was inaugurated by the JCT in memory of the late Philip Povey, Joint Secretary to the JCT and main draftsman of the contract for many years. So, welcome Katy Dowding from Skanska. Katy joined the construction industry as a trainee quantity surveyor straight after A-levels, and she's now crowned a 35-year career in the industry, with becoming President and CEO of Skanska UK 18 months ago. One of her passions is the push for greater inclusion and diversity in the industry, and perhaps this is a good week to remind ourselves that there are still battles in this area to be won. She's here to talk to us today about collaborative contracting and the better outcomes achievable through diversity and inclusion. Just to say, if you would like to post questions and comments, please don't forget to come out of full screen to post your questions. Katy.
Thank you very much, Karen. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining me for this prestigious event. It's a huge honour to be invited to be asked to speak and to follow in the footsteps of so many other great speakers of the past. JCT formed much of my early career as a trainee QS. In fact, it felt like I spent most days with either a JCT 80 or an SMM 6 in my hand. Many a happy hour passed as a young contractor, scrutinising clause 13 to see if I could find any justification or relevant event claim for additional entitlement. Happy days. I'm quite sure that in those early days, I could never have imagined myself being invited to deliver a lecture named in honour of Philip Povey, one of the titans of JCT. It's a real privilege. But before I go any further, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Katy Dowding, and I'm President and CEO of Skanska UK. We employ nearly 3,500 people and have operated in the UK as Skanska for nearly 25 years now, delivering some iconic projects such as the Kirkham, the M25 widening, Barts and London Hospital, high-speed 2 tunnels, and many, many more. Coming from Swedish heritage, I think it's fair to say that we have a natural predisposition to working collaboratively, with our naturally flat organisational structures and consensus approach to decision-making. But there is more to true collaboration than the like of ABBA and eating meatballs whilst you go furniture shopping. However, I'd like to begin my lecture some time before my Skanska days. In fact, even before my first foray into construction and JCT 35 years ago. Let us start at the very beginning, which for me is 1970. This is what childhood looked like to me. Who can forget the Queen's Silver Jubilee in 1977 with its fantastic street parties? Being sent out to play during the long hot summer of 1976 and being told not to come back until tea time. Singing along to the Wombles. Being fascinated by the slinky as it went down the stairs, or the delight of a variety pack at Christmas, full of sweets that have long since stopped being produced or have had their name completely changed. But for me, this was the centre of my universe, the riding stables. I first started attending at the age of 5, and from that point onwards, I was hooked. Every morning before school, every evening after school, and from sunrise to sunset, and quite often a fair bit beyond, every single weekend. Come rain or shine, I was there, muddy and smelling of manure and having the time of my life. But what do you say has this got to do with inclusion, diversity and collaborative contracting and construction? What I didn't realise at the time was that I was witnessing not only one of the most impressive business models that provided a seemingly endless supply of free labour, but also gave me my first experience of inclusion and collaborative working. You won't be surprised to know that I was not the only pony-crazy young girl at the riding stables. In fact, there were quite often upwards of 20 of us there, all giving our time for free and certainly doing more hours than some full-time jobs. But we did it for the love of the horse. That star prize, being able to ride them. But of course, it's not all fun and pony treks. There's a lot of muck to be cleaned up, tack to be polished, buckets of water to be carried, and you have to help with the lessons, fix the water troughs, carry bales of hay and straw, fix the wheelbarrows, and much, much more. By the time I'd reached my early teens, and having had a few years at the yard under my belt, I soon rose to the unofficial position of having to organise the girls that helped in the stables. Now, this is not an easy challenge. You have a workforce that's unpaid, they have no obligation to turn up, and are actually only interested in about 10% of the job, the bit where they get to ride the horses. So I had to devise a way of working that not only got all the jobs done, but kept the workforce engaged and continuing to turn up. And that started with discussion. Making sure everyone was a part of that discussion, that everyone had a voice, and that voice was heard, acknowledged, and responded to. There had to be fairness and equity. Preferences, limitations, and individual needs had to be considered. And we all had to be open to new ways of working and doing things. And that was really hard when you just wanted to get on with your day. But we did. We took time to work together and draw up the rotas. Those that quite liked the sweeping did more of those jobs. The stronger girls and boys did the carrying. And those that were quick and nimble did the running and backwards and forwards to the fields and with all the equipment for the lessons. And we made sure that everyone got to ride a pony. It took a lot longer to set up. It was hard to work out how jobs were shared. We all had to do bits that we didn't like. But it lasted for years as a system, and every year it got a little bit better. New people joined, and we listened to their new ideas. Those that had been there a while were able to share observations as to how things could be done better. A scenario that had all the potential to be a hotbed for tantrums and falling out was a real success through collaboration. But let us now fast forward to my career in construction. Now, I will provide a health warning at this point. I will make some broad generalisations. What I will describe will not have been everybody's experience. Some of you might have worked in some very inclusive and collaborative environments back in the day. But I'd also be inclined to suggest that this wasn't always the case. I joined the industry in the late 1980s, one of only 5 females on a day release course of 65. I only worked out on site with 1 woman in the first 6 years of my career. There was very little diversity. So actually, there was very little recognition for the need for inclusion. In a team which is homogenous, there was already inclusion. Everyone was part of the gang. Well, nearly everyone. On my first day on site, I asked where the ladies' toilet was, and I was told, we haven't got one. We weren't expecting a woman. You'll have to go to the petrol station, which is a mile down the road. Now, whilst this is not ideal, I could excuse the fact that they weren't expecting me. Their experience for the whole of their prior career never had a woman on site, and so they didn't need a toilet for one. Where the lack of inclusion really bit, though, was in the fact that for 2 years I was on the project and nothing changed. I never did get a toilet, despite asking for one. So for 2 years, I had to build in a 30 to 40 minute round trip if I needed a break. Not ideal if you're in the middle of a meeting. In fact, I've worked out that if that had continued for the whole of my career, that, based on an average of 4 toilet visits a day, in travel time alone, I would have lost 1.3 million minutes of productive work. That's 21,500 hours, 2,900 days, 572 weeks, or 12.4 years. That alone is the economic case for inclusion. No wonder we have a productivity challenge in construction. These were the days of adversarial contracting. Business on stage and screen was personified as greed is good. And the suggested way to get to the top in your career was to step on or over those around you. The bigger your shoulder pads, the more likely you were to be successful. If you could dominate a meeting and force your ideas through, that was seen as doing a good job. Casual misogyny out on site was par for the course, and having your ideas and thoughts passed over, if they were heard at all, was commonplace. Contracting tended to be siloed, with clients, architects, engineers, contractors and supply chain all working to their own objectives, protecting their own positions, prioritising their own needs. Communication was formal and on a needs-only basis, and was frequently defensive or confrontational, and incentives were not aligned. But did it really make a difference? Were the outcomes any worse? Certainly we know that there's been little progress in productivity in our industry. But is that a consequence of how we contract, or wider macroeconomic conditions outside of our control? Is it because of regulatory change or market constraints? Is it because the workplace doesn't yet allow us to bring our whole selves to work? Or is productivity the wrong focus? Should we be looking at the outcomes of our projects? Are the end user and customer needs being met? Are we achieving better outcomes now? Do our projects better serve society and create wider value? During a study by Dr. Catherine Phillips and a team of researchers for Northwestern and Stanford universities, their research used a game. I'll share with you an extract from the 21 Toys blog. Every player was given the exact same set of clues to solve a murder mystery. At first, most of the students were put into groups of 3, where everyone had a similar background and were part of the same group at the school. A few minutes later, each group of 3 was joined by a 4th person. Half of the groups were joined by someone who was like them, and half of the groups were joined by someone who was different. To make this a little easier, we'll say that half the groups were made up of all ducks, and half of the groups had 3 ducks and a goose. These groups had a short amount of time to collaboratively choose a suspect and submit their answer to Dr. Phillips's team to see if they solved the mystery. And that's where things got really interesting. The groups that had a goose performed better than the all-duck groups. A lot better. The all-duck groups chose the right suspect 54% of the time, whilst the groups with a goose got it right 75% of the time. The goose groups did 21% better. But when Dr. Phillips asked teams how confident they were about their answers, the all-duck groups were 50% more likely to say that they were sure they got the right suspect. They also said they were more comfortable working in their group and enjoyed the activity more than the groups that included a goose. Since everyone had exactly the same clues, it wasn't about different people bringing in different information, something that's commonly cited as a reason for diversifying teams. The diverse teams got their edge from the way their process changed as they reacted to having a new and different person in their team. The way that the goose groups worked together was different. First, They started by giving a new member a clear overview of the process so far, assuming that a goose would approach the problem differently than a duck. Second, they listened to the goose a lot. All groups listened to their new member, but when a goose showed up, the ducks listened for longer. They were looking for different information or ideas. Perhaps the most interesting difference is that members of goose groups were more willing to change their minds. They challenged their assumptions and examined their initial ideas more critically. They were also more open to exploring different solutions and were more likely to choose a different suspect than they had initially thought of on their own. But what happened in the groups that weren't diverse? The all-duck groups were more susceptible to several cognitive biases that are especially prevalent in groups with similar members. The false consensus effect is overestimating how much other people agree with you or think in the same way. Ducks assume that the way they think and the things they know are shared by all ducks. The overconfidence effect is being more confident in your judgment or solution than the data supports. The all-duck groups were more likely to think that they were right, even if they were wrong. It's also important to note that people typically gravitate to people that they think are like them when forming a group. So unless you look for a goose on purpose, you'll probably end up working with a bunch of ducks. Does any of this sound familiar? Let's now reflect on how this may work in the world of construction. Never more so has the adage, time is money, been true than in construction today. Once land is purchased or funds secured, the push to get building and start realising the return on your investment is significant, whether you're in a high-class office developer in the city, a headmaster waiting for your new school, or you're sitting in your local traffic queue waiting for the bypass to be built. Ministers and MPs like nothing better than a photograph on the front of a TBM or posing with a shiny shovel at the first sod is broken. But how much does that push to start impact the quality of the upfront work that's carried out? As Dr. Phillips and her team discovered, quick, confident decisions are not always the best or the most accurate. Working in diverse teams, creating inclusive conversations can be hard and time-consuming. But if we're to shift to an outcome-focused approach in our industry, one that brings better value for our end users, taxpayers, and outcomes for our customers, surely that upfront investment has got to be worth it. Let us first consider more traditional, more adversarial contracting models. Imagine a traditional 1980s competitively tendered project. Early decisions would have been made by just a few regularly used parties, with little diversity of either participants or thoughts. The site would have been identified and planning progressed based on well-used outline designs and specifications to ensure that it gets approval. Assumed costs and schedule would have been drawn up based on typical historic information to secure funding. And then a tender would have been sent out to multiple parties. Typically, there would have been little end-user engagement at this point, just an assumption of their requirements using frequently used models. Multiple parties would compete, focusing on achieving lowest cost and shortest schedule. Whilst alternate proposals may be considered, all bidders would be required to bid on a compliant design to select the winning bid, and many of the alternative options would have been lost along the way. Once the contractor was selected, the race to start building begins. Closing out design decisions, rapidly evaluating, selecting and rejecting options with very little reference back to the assumptions that the original scheme was built on. Opportunity for end-user engagement was limited, and the opportunity for value-adding additions limited by budget and funding constraints. As a contractor in a traditional lump sum project, my motivation would be to get the design closed out, subcontractors procured at today's prices, and have as short a possible programme as I can to minimise my prelims and maximise my returns. The designer, if they're contracted on a lump sum, will have forecasted their tender based on planned number of hours input. It's not in their interest to participate in multiple meetings, consider different options and solutions and debate with wider groups. You don't need to look hard to come to the view that this typical pattern was not collaborative, didn't contain much diversity of thinking, and wasn't getting the best outcome through inclusion. In short, the real victim in this situation was the end user and value creation. This approach has long been recognised as constraining, quite often resulting in at least suboptimal and sometimes wholly unsatisfactory outcomes for all the parties involved. If we are truly looking to evolve from this, look at outcome-driven value-adding solutions that can achieve cost savings, time efficiencies, improved quality, and the mitigation of risks, the currently held philosophy is that we need to move to collaborative forms of contracting. Now, I'd support this view. However, to truly unlock the potential of collaborative contracting, the missing ingredients, I feel, are inclusion and diversity. So let us first look at collaborative contracting. The term embraces a wide and flexible range of approaches to managing the relationship between project owners and other project participants, based on the recognition that there can be mutual benefit in a more collaborative and cooperative relationship between them. If the project owner contractually commits to share the benefits it receives from outstanding performance by the non-owner participants, the contract can financially motivate the non-owner participants to achieve such outcomes, even if the need to expend more effort and money to do so. This is often expressed as the establishment of a win-win scenario. There's a broad spectrum of collaborative forms of contract for the construction industry, ranging from partnering to full alliance and integrated project delivery teams. But there are some key features which are common to all of them. The first of which is a contractual commitment to cooperate and act in good faith. Number 2, early warning mechanisms designed to alert other participants to emerging issues so that solutions can be developed and agreed before the issue escalates. Early involvement of the main contractor and key specialist subcontractors in the design processes. Governance arrangements that facilitate collective problem solving and decision making. Payment arrangements that financially motivate each participant to act in a manner that is best for the project rather than best for the participant. And finally, the agreement of each participant to waive its rights to sue any other participant for mistakes, breach or negligence by another participant, except in the case of willful default. In short, collaborative contracting is relationship contracting. So let me share with you a few good examples from my career, where I've seen some good examples of the benefits of collaborative contracting. 15 years ago, we embarked on the @1 Alliance model with Anglian Water, a collaborative contract which is a partnership comprising of 8 companies who each provide specialist knowledge, enabling the @1 Alliance to deliver complex projects for upgrading sewage treatment works in the most efficient way, reducing the cost to Anglian Water's customers. The Alliance works with joint goals and common incentives, is premised on long-term ambitions, and has maintained broadly the same partners for the whole time. This has enabled us to form strong relationships with local supply chain partners, giving them long-term visibility of their pipeline of workload, which has enabled them to invest in training people, invest in machinery, technology and innovation. It's aligned us to achieve common outcomes, not distracted by commercial disputes, and has resulted in carbon reduction of 54% and cost reduction of 26% over the last 5 years. My next example is the A14, a highway scheme in Cambridge delivered for National Highways. Originally, this was procured in sections with 4 contractors. It soon became apparent that success relied on everyone working together and only achieved the benefits when the whole road was open. The project was then renegotiated into a collaborative contract with positive incentives to work together to shared goals. This resulted in the road opening 8 months early and absorbed the impact of Carillion's collapse mid-project without programme or cost impact. An interesting reflection is that we see a high proportion of collaborative forms of contracting when they are frameworks, or those which are spread out over a long period of time. Those cases where a relationship is required, rather than just a transactional interface. Take, for example, the National Rail frameworks. These provide visibility of workload under a collaborative contracting arrangement, which in turn provides the opportunity to develop a strong understanding of customer needs and build trust. Performance improves consistently following the benefit of only one mobilisation and creating a learning curve. There's no need to keep relearning every time. Risk is fairly shared with ownership and being placed on the best party to manage it. This has resulted in the ability to achieve value-adding outcomes for both the train and freight operating companies, as well as the station users. These frameworks have consistently outperformed client milestones and budgets. Now, I'm sure that you've all read plenty of press about High Speed 2. But one of the things that's less frequently reported in the media is the collaborative contracting benefits that we've seen with the London Tunnels package of works. This is set up on a collaborative contracting form. It incentivises all parties to control cost and mitigate risk, regardless of who owns it. It has a fully integrated project leadership team with no role duplication, which has enabled forward-thinking scenario planning to manage risk and seize opportunities, resulting in a positive can-do environment with an enjoyable workplace. In terms of benefits, this has mitigated £1.13 billion of cost increases compared to traditional contracting models. It's avoided £230 million worth of cost inflation and delivered £166 million of benefits through innovation, as well as mitigating 2 years of programme delays. We've also seen great examples where industry has worked together in a collaborative way to achieve better outcomes. For example, the work led by Build UK in defining the site operating procedures during COVID allowed the industry to get back to work. Or the common assessment standards that they've led on, allowing 22,000 suppliers to be certified, enabling them to get into contract without unproductive repetition and delays. In fact, JCT are leading in this area with their own suite of partnering contracts, the JCT Constructing Excellence contract family, which actively work to support the aims of collaborative contracting. In addition, the JCT 2024 edition contracts are now all subject to a collaborative working article in the main contract document, recognising the importance of this in effective outcomes. I'd also like to take the opportunity to recognise JCT for ensuring that their full suite of documents are now fully gender neutral in their drafting. This is a really important inclusion step. So, given the benefits that collaborative contracting can bring, what's the added value brought by inclusion and diversity to really move us forwards? Let us first take a moment to consider what we mean by diversity, equity and inclusion. Diversity, equity and inclusion are often grouped together because they're interconnected. And it is only in combination that their true impact emerges. But all of these terms are easily misunderstood. It's important to grasp the individual meanings and implications of each of these terms. Diversity refers to who is represented in the workforce. Some examples of diversity in the workplace include gender diversity. What makes up the composition of men, women and non-binary people in a given population? Age diversity. Are people in a group from mostly one generation, or is there a mix of ages? Ethnic diversity. Do people in a group share common national or cultural traditions, or do they represent different backgrounds? Physical ability and neurodiversity. Are the perspectives of people with disabilities, whether apparent or not, accounted for? These are just a few of the most common examples. But what is considered diverse can range widely. We tend to think about diversity in terms of things like racial diversity, gender diversity, ethnic diversity, the visible aspects of diversity. Those things are all important. But it's also important to have diversity in how people think. How people think can be driven by many factors, and many of which can be invisible. The iceberg slide shows some of the many aspects of diversity that impact on how we receive, react to, process and respond to information, all of which will bring unique perspectives. Although not visible, these are equally important and bring a richness to our teams. Let us now turn to equity. Equity refers to the fair treatment for all people, so that the norms, practices and policies in place ensure identity is not predictive of opportunities or workplace outcomes. Equity differs from equality in a subtle but very important way. While equality assumes that all people should be treated the same, equity takes into consideration a person's unique circumstances, adjusting treatment accordingly so that the end result is equal. For example, consider the implications of equity when sourcing talent. There's a real difference between equal and equitable. Suppose we said all interns are created equal. We will pay all of them nothing. The people who can afford an entire summer without getting paid are likely already coming from a position of privilege and will be able to take the internship. Those from less privileged backgrounds may not be able to afford to take unpaid work, so will be ruled out of the internship. That is inequitable. If we want to have all the voices round the table, we need to ensure we are providing equity so as not to create inadvertent exclusion. Inclusion refers to how the workforce experiences the workplace and the degree to which organisations embrace all employees and enable them to make meaningful contributions. If we recruit a diverse workforce, we must also strive to develop a sufficiently inclusive culture, such that all employees feel their voices will be heard. This is critical if we want to retain talent and unlock the power of having a diverse workforce. For example, a lack of inclusion can manifest in a workplace culture in the following way. The LGBTQ+ community is underrepresented in the workplace, especially at the more senior levels. So as a result, many can feel like they're the only at work and more likely to experience microaggressions. They might feel unable to talk openly and comfortably about themselves, for example, or need constantly to correct assumptions about their personal lives, all of which impact on their feelings of inclusion and ability to bring their whole self to work and perform at their best. Without diversity, equity and inclusion, so much of the opportunity we seek to achieve with collaborative contracting is lost. Collaborative contracting works because it brings together different parties. It aligns their perspectives, but gets the value from all of their different and unique perspectives. But all three are needed to realise the potential of diversity of thought. Diversity identifies who we need at the table. Equity ensures that all the parties are able to get to the table, regardless of barriers. And inclusion ensures that all those voices are heard once they're around the table. So let's bring this to life with a real-life example. A contractor was commissioned to build a large army barracks, including junior ranks living accommodation. Under a traditional form of contract, drawings would be prepared and then sent to the client's project manager for approval. The client's project manager was made up of industry professionals and some ex-forces representatives. Although a slightly longer process, drawings would get approved, construction completed, and the building handed over. However, post-occupancy evaluations showed that the soldiers complained of cramped living accommodation, leading to low morale and satisfaction. This in turn caused dissatisfaction with the commanding officers, frequent complaints, loss of reputation for the client's project manager, and the contractor and the soldiers' ability to perform at their best whilst carrying out their vital roles. Let us now reimagine the scenario with a collaborative form of contract, with a contractual commitment to cooperate and act in good faith. This time, outputs, specifications and drawings are prepared in a collective problem-solving way. With collaboration and workshops, end users and specialists are included, and there is an agreement for an incentivisation based on end user satisfaction. Yet once again, the same issues arise: cramped conditions, complaints, loss of reputation, and this time, financial penalties. So what's going wrong? Finally, let us now consider the collaborative form, but one where there's a culture of inclusion and diversity. This time, the collaborative working group includes all of the end users, from junior ranks to commanding officers. Inclusion training is given to all of those involved. An open culture of mutual respect and transparency is established. Those involved are focused on project outcomes, and mechanisms are put in place to not reach decisions until all points of view are assessed and considered. Hierarchy is put to one side as project value is given priority. During one of the workshops, the problem is revealed. The original space-optimised design included a large basement storage area for the soldiers' equipment. Spare uniforms, backpacks, bedding, all of these things have to be kept there. During one of the design collaboration meetings, one of the junior rank soldiers speaks up. Well, of course, I don't keep my stuff down there because it's going to get nicked. After careful questioning, it was revealed that all of the soldiers do this. They keep the stuff in their rooms. They're all subject to regular kit inspections. So if any kit is missing or damaged, there's a heavy penalty for the soldiers, and they've got to pay to replace it. A communal storage area provides too much temptation for any other soldier who has kit missing to steal it from somebody else. So all of the soldiers keep their kit in their rooms to avoid this. That's a lot of kit to store in a single bedroom. The inclusive culture allowed the junior rank soldiers to speak up and admit this in front of their senior officers without recriminations. The collaborative contracting model gave him the forum to do this. With all the participants there, the designers quickly changed the design to allow for individual storage in each room and got rid of the communal area. The design change was approved by the project manager because they could clearly see the value-add benefit, and it resulted in a happy end user and customer and reward and recognition for all the contracting parties. By leveraging the strengths of both inclusion and diversity initiatives and collaborative contracting models, businesses can achieve not only better social outcomes, but tangible economic benefits that contribute to long-term success. Contracting's come a long way since the 80s, and we do, without doubt, work in safer environments, deliver projects that contribute positively to the environment. We've come on leaps and bounds in terms of technology and digital, and there, without doubt, has been a shift to value creation. How we contract is considerably more collaborative. We're achieving better outcomes for our customers and wider stakeholders. Our working environments on projects are cleaner, more collaborative, and we're more inclusive. What we really need to do now is to accelerate our performance. I genuinely believe that the combination of inclusion and diversity with collaborative contracting is the move that can help us make that better step change. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Katy. Thanks in particular for highlighting the collaborative features of the new JCT 2024 suite. Really appreciate you doing that. We'll now take your comments and questions, and I see that there are now questions and comments pouring in. Can I just jump the queue by asking you a couple of questions?
I think that's your privilege.
Yes, thank you very much. Understood. I think you probably guessed I was going to ask this. As a lawyer, I'm very interested in the concept under collaborative contracts where everybody agrees not to sue each other. So paraphrasing this, I think it's called a no-blame culture. Mm-hmm. Does this include the client, and how on earth does this actually work?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, collaborative contracting needs all of the parties involved. And actually, the culture can get set by the client from the top as well, so you absolutely need them to be participative. So yeah, so they have to buy into not suing us either.
And is this just during the currency of the project, or is it for the subsequent limitation period, for want of a better phrase?
Yeah, it rolls through. So, I mean, certainly last week I was in Norway visiting a healthcare project that we did under a collaborative contracting form. And actually, during the duration of the contract, there was no liquidated damages. Mm-hmm. And there was actually no agreed end date.
No unliquidated damages either.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. But there was also no end date, because actually they were focusing on the outcome, so having a penalty for the completion date. What they were looking at is getting the best healthcare project they could for the time as well.
Do you think that's a Scandinavian mindset rather than a British mindset?
I think it's easier to implement in Scandinavia. I think culturally they're more aligned to it. But we have seen it working in the UK. There's obviously some examples I gave here as well. So.
Turning to our audience's questions, collaboration was one of the principal recommendations of the Latham report. You and I can both remember the Latham report going back. Given this report was published over 30 years ago, what progress do you think we've all made?
Incredibly slow, I think is the unsurprising answer to that question. And I think what we quite often see is you'll see a shift towards collaborative forms of contracting. But then when the pressure comes on, budgets get tight, whatever it might be, people can very easily revert. And I think it requires you to be bold and have a true belief in the outcomes that it will achieve to push through the difficult times and not revert to some of the more traditional behaviours as well. The
sort of beg your neighbour approach that tends to prevail otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is a challenging one. This is a challenge to us as JCT now, but please speak your mind. Okay. Could JCT do more to support the sort of collaboration to which you refer? Do you think the greater use of the little used constructing excellence contract does enough, or does it need something more radical, such as the integrated project insurance-based contract?
There's definitely more that can be done to support this. I mean, I'm certainly not the technical person to give the answer to that. But I think it's interesting, I was reflecting on, in the public sector, we've got the construction playbook. But actually, government mandated that we're going to use the playbook, which embraces a lot of the principles of collaborative contracting. but it hasn't been fully adopted. You know, and I can't how many years it ago now it got rolled out. So I think there's more. I think JCT could do more, but I think we need to think about how the behaviours support the contract as well.
And how would you say is the way to disseminate the behaviours that support what's in the contract? Because my experience, I'm afraid, it's slightly unrewarding for me as a non-contentious lawyer in practice. They literally do leave it in the drawer unless something goes wrong. Yeah. So that those attempts, which I think we all make as draftspersons and as JCT does, to modify behaviour for the better with good practice, how else are we going to disseminate those desirable behaviours within the industry?
I think there's something in this around role modelling and giving examples, being able to communicate actually the genuine benefits that these have delivered. So actually, you know, proving the tangible benefits with whether projects are finishing earlier, more satisfied customers. So you know, cause and effect. Actually, on this project, we use these forms of contract, we adopted these behaviours, and actually these are the positive outcomes for the project. So I think there's more we can be done to promote the good practice and the outcomes it achieves.
So I think there's a danger, isn't there, with project teams, that there's quite a siloed mentality. I think that's less common these days, but the designers are in their silo and the contractors are in their silo and the specialist and the client. How do you get people out of those silos? I mean, I've heard, I'm sure you have, of the concept of making the virtual company, that you cease to be in your silos for the purpose of the project and for the benefit of the project. You become a virtual company for the duration of the project. And certainly I've seen that work in practice, that people come together and are all collectively very invested in a project. Do you think that silo mentality is starting to break down, and how would you break it down further?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've definitely still got a real mix across the industry. I mean, in practical terms, co-location is a marvellous thing. But I think that I spoke earlier in the presentation about upfront effort, and I think there's something about really agreeing on what are the project outcomes. I quite often, when I think about the Olympics, that was a really good example, because everybody working on the Olympics understood when it had to be delivered and why it had to be. You know, nobody had to sell the message, and everybody from, you know, the gateman through to the chief exec all understood that, you know, London 2012 was happening, when it's happening, and why it had to be ready for that. And you know, UK wanted to be proud of what we were delivering. So that, I think that project is a really good example of a alignment about the project outcomes and getting behind that at the beginning.
And so this is a bit of a disastrous scenario again. If things do go wrong during the build process or after, and things do go wrong as we've seen on Grenfell, how are parties to be held accountable if there is in fact a no-blame culture?
Well, I mean, collaborative contracting doesn't take away from your contract obligations. You know, you still have your contract obligations, so you still have a contract, but collaboratively is how you work. So I think, you know, if you have a breach of your conditions, then obviously, you know, that has to be dealt with. I think with collaborative contracting, it's that cross-blaming that we're looking, you know, the time that's wasted on.
He said, she said. Or
exactly.
He said,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but if somebody hasn't fulfilled, you know, if they've included some material that's out of specification, or there's been defective workmanship, you know, it doesn't detract from that. But
presumably they're given the opportunity to get it corrected rather than
absolutely
have people shouting and throwing bricks at them. That's the idea.
Or slapping a large bill on the table.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, gosh, this is such a QS-y QS-y
I haven't done any QSing for quite some time. So.
Are there any benefits of using the standard form of building contract with quantities? In other words, is this seen as a more cost-effective contract, given the readily available quantities on a contract? And how does it promote collaboration? Probably the answer is it doesn't, I would have thought.
Yeah, I was trying to find a longer way of saying that, but yeah, I'd have to give that one some thought, but I don't quite see how it would.
I mean, to me, that's going back to the very sort of regimented silo.
Yeah.
Sort of, you said you do this. Look at page 3. You said you do it for that price.
You said you were going to give me 3,000 metres cubed and you've only given me 2,998. So.
That's not exactly consistent with the known blame culture, is it?
No.
So once you've employed a collaborative contracting approach for the first time with clients, does it become easier for future work, as you will have seen and shared the benefits? How do you get your client? It's easy with a rerun. We were talking earlier about we're on our third fit out with a client's doing taking a lot of new premises, and in a sense, with us and the contractor and the client and the design team, we are starting to become, as it were, the virtual company that we see the projects through together, and there's a lot more discussion about what would be good for the project. How do you get people on board that train for the first one?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's no coincidence that you see a lot of collaborative contracting in either long-term contracts or long-term frameworks where you can continue to build on and build on building. And you definitely get the improvements. It's interesting when you look at some of the longer-term ones, such as the App One Alliance, you've no idea which party the people working on it have come from. They all work for App One Alliance, they know what they're trying to achieve. I think, again, I can keep coming back to this upfront investment. I think there's putting that time in on the first one about workshopping how you're going to work, doing some scenario planning, talking about the shared values, and also as you get people who join the contract along the way, sometimes you get, so you have to invest time in thinking about that. You can't just say, here's a collaborative form of contract, off you go.
So you're workshopping it, in other words?
Workshopping it, discussing it, scenario planning it, yeah. And, working through some example problems that might go wrong and how you would deal with it.
So the questions are coming in thick and fast now. So would you say that a key to collaborative contracts is a complete understanding of the risks and opportunities that may present themselves and ownership of this? Or is this a barrier in itself to collaboration, as it might create different priorities? So what impact is your understanding your risk register going to have on that collaborative process?
I mean, with the best will in the world, no risk register is ever going to be complete. Nobody will have ever thought. So I think for me, this is about how you respond to risk. I think that's what yes, you can talk through the risks and opportunities that might appear on your schedule, because I think the other thing as well, we've got to remember, this is about exploiting opportunities for benefit. So I think your risk and opportunity register is an important document, but it's never going to be comprehensive. I think understanding how you respond as a team to issues as they emerge, I think that's where the real benefit and value comes.
And this might be a difficult issue, but are you financially incentivized? Are you advocating financially incentivising this collaboration process as well?
Yeah, shared incentivisation models.
So something like target cost and
so
forth.
Yeah, and pain gain mechanisms, whatever it might be.
I'll just mention it briefly that you're aware that the JCT is going to produce a new target cost contract as part of this suite. I'll be interested to hear offline what you think about it.
Yes, interested to hear more about that one.
So, and this is something one of our questioners asked, with sourcing talent, how do you manage the balance between the important need to maximise inclusion and increasing equitability with ensuring that the best candidates are chosen on their own merit?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, I wouldn't say anybody else believes it. It should always be the best person for the job. I think the thing where you have to put the extra work in now is making sure you're doing your sourcing from sufficiently diverse pools. When you're looking to recruit, is the language that you're using in the job advert inclusive or exclusive? Are you posting it in the same locations or with the same companies or the same areas where you might not be picking up a more diverse candidate? So it should always be the best person for the job, but making sure you're casting your net widely enough in the first place in an inclusive way is what's going to be important.
I mean, I've got an example of that. So a firm at which I used to be a partner, a law firm, there was a marvellous incident during a partners meeting where somebody was moaning about the fact that we shouldn't accept candidates with lower A-level results than the big city firms, at which point the senior partner spoke up and said, that's great, but I left school at 16 and became a clerk. Do you realise that I would never have become your senior partner if you took that attitude to all your recruitment? That's it in action, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I think that's fascinating. So how do you, using geese for, I suppose they are the diverse and challenger candidate, they're the challengers of attitude. How do you recruit more geese into your team?
Yeah, well, like I said, I think you think about how you're advertising the positions. When I did some of my studies, I actually had a fantastic project director who was working with me, but he was an ex-submarine commander. So I think you need to help the people who are doing the recruiting, the interviewing as well, to see, when I have a submarine commander, how do I recognise the values, the qualities that he can bring to running this project? Because I can't ask him to say, show me the last 5 projects that you built, and I can evaluate that on that. So I think we need, as employers, we need help in being able to recognise the value that diverse or geese-like candidates can bring.
I'm just thinking of the fact that a lot of school and college bursars all seem to be former military people. So I suppose that's transferable skills, isn't it? I think we're coming to the end of the questions now, Katy. That's been absolutely fascinating and very, very thought-provoking.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for coming to talk to us today. I think I've probably got endless questions, which I'll probably put to you later. So to all of you joining us this afternoon for the Povey Lecture or listening later, thank you so much, and thank you very much for attending this afternoon's presentation.